So here's the old Giubo or flex disc from the E46 here. This thing is destroyed. You can tell just how pliable it's become, and there are just chunks of rubber missing. Needless to say, this thing probably would have failed sooner or later, so good thing I'm replacing it now. So the new Giubo is in already, not bolted down yet. I did manage to get it out without having to drop the exhaust because my exhaust bolts, you can see up there, are rusted beyond serviceability. See the rubber that the old Giubo left behind? So it was a good thing, as I said, that I replaced this now. And I did manage to get this installed without having to drop my exhaust, which was huge. So the way I managed to get the new one in was by, first I had the drive shaft hanging off, and I slipped the Giubo over the snout or the pin coming out of the transmission, and then I kind of lifted up the drive shaft into the Giubo, and I twisted the Giubo down. Can't quite do it, it's pretty stiff. I twisted it down and then just kind of pushed the drive shaft up into it next to the pin. So you can see the pin coming off the back of the transmission here, right up in the middle there. So what I did is I had the drive shaft, the end of the drive shaft and the pin, both resting in the middle of the Giubo. You can kind of see it here. I had them side by side, and then what I did is I took just a thick flathead screwdriver, and I kind of levered the pin. I levered the drive shaft up onto the pin, and then ended up taking a dead blow hammer and just hitting it right there in order to seat the pin into the rubber bushing in the end of the drive shaft. I wish I took a video of it, but fortunately not. Alright, so now I have to line up the Giubo. So if you notice, for every two holes here, there's a thicker part and then there's a thinner part of rubber. So what you're going to want is obviously transmission, this flange here, and the drive shaft here are going to be rotating the same direction. So what you're going to want is the thicker part, not the thinner part here, but the thicker part of the Giubo to be compressed between the torque of the transmission going to the drive shaft. So you're going to want to orient these so that, let's see if I can do it with one hand, so that we have a bolt going through transmission into the Giubo, and then in this case, looking from the back of the car, the drive shaft spins counterclockwise, so bolt going transmission to Giubo, and then squeezing the thick part of the Giubo going to bolt going from Giubo to drive shaft. So this orientation will bolt it up like that. Alright, so just to be sure I have this going the right way, I'm going to take my foot and spin the tire forward, just to show you. Refocus. So when I spin the tire forward, the drive shaft spins counterclockwise looking from the back of the car. And we have a thicker part. If you can imagine the torque coming from this side, coming from the transmission, this thicker part is being compressed between the torque of the transmission and the output to the drive shaft, so that's correct. So here are the bolts that came out of the flex disc. I know BMW recommends you replace them, but these are really good steel bolts. And I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite on the threads, so I'm just going to run with the ones that came out of the car. If you look at these two, you'll notice a little corrosion on the shank of the bolt. I had to tap those out with a drift pin. They're a little tricky, so I'm going to hit those with a little bit of Scotch-Brite, and then I'll probably put a little bit of anti-seize on all of them, just the smallest amount on the shank of all of them. And these bolts are in shear. They're not in tension, so I don't worry too much about the anti-seize, loosening them up. It should be between the shank of the bolt and the sleeve inside the flex disc, so it should be okay. It should just mitigate corrosion like that. Alright, so now let's see if I can slip the bolts in. Let's try one. Perfect. Nice and easy. And then just going to go one by one. Alright. 2 in. Perfect. 3. The first 2 were tricky. They kind of had to set the alignment, but now these are going in no problem. And the last one. A little bit of a problem. I'll figure that one out. And a little light persuasion with the hammer was enough to get that last one through. Alright, I'm going to see if I can do this without interfering with the camera too much. So off camera, I'm just putting a bit of Loctite on the bolts, or on the nuts, rather. And then see if we can fit it up. And these are lock nuts. They have like a compressed metal ridge on the collar there, so they should work. But the fact that I'm reusing them, I'm just going to take that extra safety precaution. Excuse the noise, that's my garage heater. Transmissions are a bit trickier because the nut is recessed. It's not recessed, but it's just a little bit harder to reach. It's a bit better if you spin the bolt onto the nut if you can't immediately get the nut. And of course, all while you're doing this, I'd leave the car in neutral with the parking brake off, so that it's easy to spin everything over that you need. And that should be 3, so we should have 3 left. Putting a pretty decent amount of Loctite on these, just because they're torqued down pretty heavily. So I think it's fair to do that, and I definitely don't want these coming loose at highway speeds. Right, these are all going on, no problem. Good news. One last one, transmission side. Generous amount and fit it up. And there we go. Now to torque these all down. Alright, so got the new flex disc on and everything torqued down, so now it's time to reinstall the transmission cross member. So the wider bolt pattern goes towards the front of the car. In this case, yes, the front of the car is this way. I'm just kind of want to fit it up. Should slide the transmission mounts into their holes. And once you do that, it should just kind of hang there. And then you can get the hardware on. All right, and finally, we can slide the hardware in. 1, 2, and then 2 on the other side. I had to bend the heat shield for the exhaust out of the way a little bit to get the 2 on this side. All right, and the last one.
No, somebody doesn't want to come in the garage.
Uh-oh.
Are you warming up?
Yeah, I'm fine. All right. The transmission should be bolted back up.
That's not an air gun, is it?
No, it's electric.